Welcome back to the Deep Dive. It is Friday, January 30th, 2026. And I have to say, usually when we sit down to do this, we're looking for a singular theme. You know, this is the week of the economy or this is the week of the election. But this week, it just defies that kind of neat categorization.
It really does. If you try to put this week in a box, the box just, it explodes.
Okay.
We are looking at a stack of reports today that paints a picture of a world that is shifting under our feet in three completely different directions, all at the same time.
It really feels like we're hitting a seminal inflection point. If you look at the headlines, we have three massive stories colliding, and they all feel like they belong in different movies, you know. First, you have a kinetic war that is literally redrawing the map of the Western Hemisphere down in Venezuela.
A very physical, very old school kind of conflict in a way.
Exactly. Then you have an algorithmic war that just escalated with a massive new AI release from China. And that fundamentally changes the whole architecture of intelligence.
Not just a new product, but a new way of thinking.
A new way of thinking. And then if you look up, we have this crisis in the orbital commons where our physical grip on space just seems to be slipping. It's like everything is happening at once.
It's the convergence of the kinetic, the algorithmic, and the orbital. And usually we treat these as separate beats, right? Politics is over here, tech is over there, and space. Well, space is for the science geeks.
Right.
But the mission for this deep dive, I think, is to figure out how they belong in the same story. Because they are absolutely connected.
That's the real challenge, isn't it? How does a Rubio Doctrine unfolding in Caracas connect to a System 2 reasoning model being developed in a lab in Beijing? Because I think you're right. They're both about control, who controls the energy, who controls the intelligence, and who controls the high ground.
And the fragility of that control. That's the subtext I'm seeing in all these documents we've been poring over. We are flexing incredible muscles in Venezuela, effectively engaging in state building. But at the same time, we're losing the signal from a Mars orbiter.
It's a paradox of power.
It is. We are expanding our reach on Earth while our actual tether to the cosmos, to the future in a way, is fraying.
Well, let's start with the flex. We have to start in the Western Hemisphere because we are looking at what is arguably the biggest geopolitical shakeup in, a decade? Venezuela, Operation Absolute Resolve.
The dust is finally starting to settle from that January 3rd intervention. We're nearly a month out now, and we are moving out of the shock and awe phase, the removal of Maduro, and into something much, much more complex. We're moving from decapitation to state reconstruction.
And we got the blueprint for that reconstruction this week, didn't we? Secretary of State Marco Rubio testified before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee on January 28th. We pulled the full transcript. And I want to drill into this because analysts are already calling this the Rubio Doctrine.
It's a fascinating document to read. I mean, if you look at the language carefully, Rubio is walking a very, very specific tightrope. He is explicitly rejecting the word occupation.
Oh, absolutely. That's the poison pill word.
It is. The administration knows that word is political poison, both domestically and internationally. They don't want the optics of U.S. boots on the ground running the local DMV in Caracas.
But when you look at the actual mechanics he described, the level of control, it doesn't look like total sovereignty either.
Not even close. It describes a level of granular control that rivals, frankly, historical protectorates. This isn't just advising. This is architectural control of the state. And he broke it down into three specific phases.
Okay, let's unpack those phases, because phase one is stabilization. This is the part that I think is confusing a lot of observers, and me included. The U.S. went in, they removed Maduro. He's in detention somewhere. But the government, the bureaucracy, the ministers, the people pushing the paper, they are, by and large, still there.
This is the cohabitation strategy, and it's highly controversial, for good reason. The U.S. has kept interim President Delcy Rodriguez in power. They are utilizing the existing Chavista infrastructure to run the country.
Which seems completely counterintuitive to a lot of people. I mean, if you spend $1 billion, which, according to the latest reports, we have to decapitate a regime, why would you keep the body of the regime alive? Why keep the old guard in the palace?
It's a very specific calculation, and it's a calculation based on what game theorists and historians would call the compliance trap. To understand why they're doing this, you really have to look back at the invasion of Iraq in 2003.
De-Ba'athification.
Exactly. The U.S. policy there was de-Ba'athification. We went in, we fired everyone, the entire army, the police, the civil servants, even the school teachers who were party members. We just cleaned house.
And the result was immediate, catastrophic insurgency because all those people had no income and, more importantly, no stake in the new system. They had nothing left to lose.
Precisely. They took their guns and their expertise and went home to fight the occupiers. So what Rubio is trying to do is avoid that specific catastrophic error. By keeping Rodriguez and the Chavista bureaucracy in place, the U.S. is essentially taking the entire state apparatus hostage.
That's a strong way to put it.
But it's accurate. They are giving him a stake in the new order. They are effectively telling Rodriguez, you can stay in the presidential palace. You can keep the water running. You can keep the lights on. You can even keep your salary. But your survival, your entire existence, is now completely dependent on our approval.
So it turns the state apparatus into a hostage of its own survival.
Exactly. But it comes with a very, very short leash. Rubio was explicit in the hearing that while Rodriguez manages domestic affairs, she has zero, and I mean zero, strategic autonomy. He used a phrase that really stuck out to me. The U.S. reserves the right to eliminate threats unilaterally.
That's a heavy phrase to use when you're talking about a supposedly sovereign nation.
Yeah.
What does that look like in practice? What does unilaterally mean here?
Well, he used a hypothetical, but it was a very pointed one. He said, effectively, if we get intelligence that an Iranian drone factory is being set up in the jungle, or a Russian intelligence listening post is being activated, or a Hezbollah finance cell is operating in Caracas, we don't ask the interim president for permission to remove it.
You don't even call her.
We just remove it. We strike it, and she will read about it in the news with everyone else.
So the message to Rodriguez is crystal clear. Don't let Tehran or Moscow back in, or we will handle it for you, and you might not like how we do it.
Correct. The ultimate goal here, from the U.S. perspective, is to completely destroy the strategic depth that Iran and Russia have been building in the Caribbean for the last decade. Venezuela was their playground in our backyard. That playground is now closed. And Delcy Rodriguez is the custodian of the lock, but the U.S. holds the only key.
She's in a very, very tight box. But the walls of that box are made of money. Or, to be more specific, oil. This brings us to phase 2 of the plan. Energy receivership.
This is the economic engine of the entire operation. And honestly, this is the most innovative and, you could say, ruthless part of the plan. President Trump issued a directive for somewhere between 30 and 50 million barrels of Venezuelan crude to be transferred to the U.S.
Okay, now, normally when a country sells its oil, they get paid for it, and that money goes into their national treasury to pay for things. But this isn't a standard purchase agreement, is it?
No, not at all. It's what the documents are calling a closed-loop economic model. And you have to follow the money here very carefully to understand how it controls the entire country.
Let's do it.
Okay, so the oil is extracted and it's sold by U.S. entities at market value. That heavy crude then hits the Gulf Coast refineries, which, has a nice side effect of stabilizing gas prices here at home, which is a big political win for the administration.
Okay, so the oil leaves Venezuela.
Yeah.
Step 1, where does the cash go?
That's the catch. The cash never touches the Venezuelan treasury. It doesn't go to Delcy Rodriguez's accounts. It bypasses the Venezuelan central bank and the entire domestic banking system and goes directly into U.S.-controlled escrow accounts.
So Venezuela exports the physical resource, but the U.S. holds the wallet.
Exactly. And here's the final turn of the screw. Those funds can only be released to buy goods and services from the United States.
Wow. It's the company store model, but applied to an entire nation-state.
Essentially, yes, it creates a massive store credit system. But look at the strategic genius of it. And I use genius in a purely Machiavellian sense here. It achieves 2 critical goals. First, it reintegrates Venezuelan oil into the U.S. market, which we need. But second, and this is the more important part, it completely starves the Chavista patronage network.
Explain that mechanism. How does that network usually work, and how does this break it?
Well, under Maduro, loyalty was bought with hard currency. It was simple. You sold oil to China or on the black market, you got bags of US dollars or euros, and you handed those physical dollars to the generals, to the collectivo leaders, and to the regional governors to keep them loyal.
Cash for loyalty.
Cash for loyalty. This closed-loop model completely cuts off the supply of hard currency. There are no more bags of cash.
You can't bribe a general with store credit for U.S. wheat or medical supplies.
You absolutely cannot. You can feed the population, you can buy medicine, you can repair the electrical grid, all things that keep the population from rioting, which is good for stability. But you cannot skim cash off the top to buy loyalty. It fundamentally breaks the glue that held the entire Chavista regime together. It forces the state to rely on U.S. supply chains for its literal day-to-day survival.
It's a complete economic and political stranglehold. Which leads us, I guess, to the final phase. We have stabilization, we have receivership, now we have the transition, or as I've seen some of the sources in our stack calling it, democracy deferred.
This is the most ambiguous part of the whole plan. Senator Shaheen from New Hampshire pressed Rubio on this exact point in the hearing. She wanted a date. She asked, effectively, when do the Venezuelan people actually get to vote for their own leaders?
And what was his answer?
He refused to give a timeline. He said, and I'm quoting here, 3 or 4 or 5 months from now cannot look like what today looks like.
That is intentionally vague. That could mean anything.
It is. It's as vague as it gets. The priority right now is clearly stability over immediate democracy. The administration is terrified that if they hold a premature election, it would just lead to a civil war between the various factions.
So trying to freeze the conflict in place.
They want to freeze the conflict, not resolve it immediately through the ballot box. They are buying time. They want to weaken the old guard economically before they let them compete electorally.
And I imagine this freeze isn't going over perfectly smoothly back home in Washington. We saw some pretty significant pushback in that hearing from the Democratic side of the aisle.
Oh, absolutely. Senator Jean Shaheen, as we mentioned, she pointed out the cost. We've already spent $1 billion on this operation in less than a month. Her critique was really sharp. She basically said, we paid $1 billion to swap Maduro for Rodriguez. Is that the deal?
So her point is, if all the same people are running the ministries, if the oppression apparatus is still technically in place, what did we actually change for the average Venezuelan on the street?
Exactly. What did $1 billion buy them? And then Senator Chris Murphy from Connecticut, he went even further. He called the whole thing oil at gunpoint.
That's a strong charge.
Right. He's questioning the moral hazard here. Are we building a nation, or are we just securing a gas station for ourselves? It's the age-old debate of interventionism, isn't it? Is this sustainable stabilization, or is it just resource extraction under a big security umbrella? And that's a very valid question, because if you look at the ground reality in Caracas, it's still incredibly dangerous.
Let's talk about that ground reality, because for Delcy Rodriguez, this situation sounds completely impossible. She is squeezed between the U.S. demands on one side, give us the oil, keep things quiet, and the hardliners in her own party on the other.
She is the definition of precarious. You have to remember, Diosdado Cabello is still the interior minister. And for anyone who doesn't know, Cabello is the hardliner's hardliner. He's the enforcer. He controls the colectivos.
And just to remind everyone, the colectivos are these paramilitary motorcycle gangs that have acted as these street-level enforcers for the regime for years.
They are the regime's muscle. And we saw them in action just this week.
What happened?
There were spontaneous celebrations in some neighborhoods in Caracas, people thinking the end of Maduro meant immediate freedom, that the party was starting, the colectivos were deployed to shut them down. Violently.
So that proves that while the U.S. might control the airspace and the oil terminals, the coercive state on the street, the guys with the guns on the corners, are still very much intact and loyal to the old guard.
It's a very fragile equilibrium. One wrong move by Rodriguez, one miscalculation by the U.S., and the whole thing could ignite. But there is one major geopolitical loser in all of this that we haven't really focused on yet, and that's China.
Right. This is what some analysts are calling the China pivot reversal. Right. For the last 10 years, the narrative has been that China is moving into the Caribbean. They were lending billions to Maduro, building infrastructure, establishing a real security foothold.
Operation Absolute Resolve has effectively severed that security foothold. It's gone.
The door has just been slammed shut in their face.
Militarily, yes. Beijing still has deep economic ties in the Southern Cone, in Chile, Argentina, Brazil. But the idea of a Chinese naval base in Venezuela, a listening post, that is completely off the table now. The U.S. has reasserted raw physical control over the Caribbean basin. It's a Neo-Monroe Doctrine in action.
So that is the kinetic theater, the U.S. asserting raw physical economic control in the Western Hemisphere. A very messy, very old world power play. But now I want to pivot us to the other side of the world and to a completely different type of conflict. One where the U.S. isn't asserting control, but seems to be struggling to even find its footing.
The Eurasian standoff.
Exactly. We had these high-stakes peace talks in Abu Dhabi this week, from January 23rd to the 26th. The U.S., Russia, Ukraine, all in a room. And if Venezuela was an example of decisive unilateral action, this feels like the complete opposite. It feels like paralysis.
It was an abject failure. There is really no other way to spin it. And the failure, I think, started with who even showed up to the table. The optics of the delegation mismatch were startling, to say the least.
Paint that picture for us. Who was at the table for each side?
Okay, so on the U.S. side, leading the delegation, you had Steve Witkoff. Now, Witkoff is a very successful man, no doubt, but he is a real estate developer. He's a deal maker in the New York business sense. And alongside him was Jared Kushner.
Okay, so business guys, deal makers.
And on the Russian side, who did they send? They sent Igor Kostyukov, the head of the GRU, the head of Russian military intelligence.
That is a stark contrast. One side sends real estate developers, the other sends their top spy.
It's a massive signal. European observers, people like Kaja Kallas from the EU, they looked at this and basically said, the U.S. is treating this like a business deal that went sour. Russia is treating this like a war. The Russians sent the guys who draw maps in blood. The U.S. sent the guys who draw up contracts in boardrooms.
But let me play devil's advocate for a second here. If the Russian demands were so maximalist, and we'll get to those demands in a minute, why did the U.S. delegation even stay in the room for 3 days? Was this just political theater, or was there an actual negotiation happening under the table that we don't know about?
That's the billion-dollar question, isn't it? If you read the tea leaves from the readouts, there's a sense that the U.S. side, led by Witkoff, might have been genuinely trying to transact. They were looking for a deal structure. You know, maybe some land swaps in exchange for sanctions relief, something tangible they could bring home and sell as a win.
Something they could put on a PowerPoint slide.
Exactly. But the Russians weren't there to trade. They weren't there to negotiate. They were there to dictate terms.
And they were dictating terms based on this mysterious Anchorage formula. We keep hearing this phrase pop up. What is it? What do we know about it?
This is one of those things that historians are going to be digging into for years to come. The Russians kept referencing an Anchorage formula, and they allege it was a private understanding reached between Trump and Putin way back in August 2025 in Alaska. We don't know the exact text, nobody's seen it, but the Russian interpretation of it is completely maximalist.
What were they asking for specifically in Abu Dhabi?
Two main things. First, they demanded recognition of Russian sovereignty over the entire administrative borders of the Donbass region.
Wait, not just the parts they currently occupy?
No. That's the crucial detail. They want Ukraine to diplomatically cede territory that Russian troops have never even set foot in, or in some cases have been pushed out of. They want the map to reflect their ambition, not the reality of the front line. And then second, they demanded denazification, which is just their long-standing code for complete regime change in Kyiv.
And obviously, President Zelensky wasn't going to go for that.
It was a categorical rejection. He released a statement saying territorial integrity is non-negotiable. So the talks hit a brick wall immediately. The only thing they made any progress on was apparently a draft security guarantee document. It was 100% ready, they said, and some vague talk of policing a DMZ.
But no agreement on where that DMZ would even be.
Or who would enforce it. So at the end of the day, it was 3 days of talking that went nowhere.
And this failure, it's causing real friction with our European allies.
Oh, major friction. The EU was already deeply skeptical of this whole channel. Now they are openly questioning the competence of the U.S. delegation. They're seeing the U.S. paralyzed in Eurasia while being hyper-aggressive in Venezuela, and it creates this perception of a very unbalanced superpower one that can beat up a weakened state in its own backyard, but doesn't have a coherent strategy for handling a peer competitor in Europe.
And there's a third player watching all of this unfold with absolute, abject terror. And that is Iran.
This is what we're calling the expendable ally linkage. If you are sitting in Tehran right now and you watch Maduro fall Maduro, who is a key ally of Russia and China, and you see Moscow do absolutely nothing to save him, you start to sweat a lot.
You start to think, am I next on the list?
Yeah, exactly. The intelligence reports coming out are describing what they call a proto-revolution bubbling up inside Iran right now. The rial, their currency, has collapsed to what is being called functional zero. The economy is completely destroyed. And there is a palpable fear in the regime that the U.S., having now finished its regime change project in Caracas, might just decide to pivot that entire toolkit to Tehran.
It sounds like the psychological fear barrier is finally breaking inside the country.
That's the most vivid detail from the reports. Despite military tribunals, despite internet blackouts, people are still coming out to protest. They feel like the regime is cornered and isolated. They feel like Iran has become expendable to Russia, just like Venezuela was. They know Moscow is too tied up in Ukraine and too weak economically to come and save them.
So we have a complete reordering in the Americas, a dangerous standoff in Europe, and a potential collapse in the Middle East. That is the kinetic picture. It's messy, it's violent, and it's all very much about physical territory and control. But as we said at the top, the map of the world isn't the only thing that's changing this week. The very structure of intelligence itself is shifting under our feet.
This brings us to the algorithmic war. And honestly, this might be the most consequential story of the week, even if it doesn't have any explosions or Senate hearings attached to it.
We are now 1 year out from the DeepSeek shock of January 2025. Just to remind our listeners, that was when the global markets crashed for a few days because the Chinese AI model suddenly looked way more competitive than anyone in the West thought was possible.
Right. And for the last year, the entire U.S. response has been built on one single strategy.
Yeah.
Export controls. Ban the chips. Stop them from getting the latest NVIDIA H100s and B200s. The thesis was simple. If we starve them of the compute power, we win the AI race by default.
And the news this week suggests that thesis is completely failing.
It's failing. The war has shifted from a battle of resources to a battle of ideas, from market volatility to architectural superiority. And we have seen two massive developments this week from China that suggest they aren't just catching up anymore. In some very specific ways, they are leaping ahead by completely changing the rules of the game.
Let's start with Moonshot AI and this new model they released, Kimi K2.5.
This is what some are calling the open weights threat. Moonshot released Kimi K2.5, and it is what we would call a thinking model. It has advanced reasoning capabilities.
So when you say thinking, you mean it's capable of System 2 reasoning. That's similar to what OpenAI has been working on with their O1 series, right?
Exactly. Most AI models we use every day, like the older GPTs, they're what you call System 1. They're intuitive, they predict the next word really fast, based on patterns. System 2 is fundamentally different. It stops, it thinks, it plans out its reasoning. It uses a chain of thought process to reason through a complex problem before it even starts to write an answer.
And Kimi K2.5 can do this.
It can. But here is the kicker, and this is the really disruptive part. It's open weights.
Meaning it's free.
It's free. You can download it, you can modify it, you can run it on your own hardware. It's out in the wild.
So the core capability that Western tech giants like Google and OpenAI are planning to sell for a premium behind a paywall is now a commodity that anyone can access.
It is rapidly becoming a commodity. And if you look at the benchmarks, like the Humanities Last Exam benchmark and some of the advanced math benchmarks, this free open-source Chinese model is beating GPT-5 and Claude Sonnet 4.5 in head-to-head comparisons.
Wait, it's beating GPT-5? The model that isn't even fully released yet?
On specific high-level reasoning tasks, yes, the preliminary benchmarks show it has an edge. And that is absolutely terrifying for the Western business model for AI. The entire moat for companies like OpenAI or Anthropic is that they have the smartest, most capable proprietary models. If a Chinese lab gives away a model that is just as smart or even smarter for free, that moat just evaporates. It deflates the entire valuation bubble of the Western AI sector.
And it's not just the reasoning that's changing. There was another leak this week, this one from DeepSeek, the Model 1 leak. And this gets really into the weeds of how these things actually work. But I want to take a moment here because this feels absolutely crucial.
This is the real technical deep dive. DeepSeek is preparing to launch a completely new architecture for their models, and some developers found references to it buried in their public GitHub code for a library called Flash MLA. It repeatedly references something called Engram memory.
Engram. That sounds biological, like something from neuroscience.
It is completely bio-inspired. And to understand why this is such a big deal, we have to look at the single biggest fatal flaw of the transformer architecture, which is what every major AI model uses today. It suffers from what engineers call quadratic complexity when it comes to memory.
Okay, let's unbox quadratic complexity, because that sounds like math homework I never want to do again.
It's a simple concept with massive consequences. Imagine you were reading a book. In a standard transformer model, which is what ChatGPT is, every time you read a new word, the model has to look back and compare that new word to every single word that came before it, just to understand the context.
So if I'm on page 100 of the book, The AI is constantly cross-referencing against every single word on pages 1 through 99 for every new word it reads.
Constantly. And if you go to page 200, the amount of work doesn't just double, it quadruples. It's an explosion of computation. It scales quadratically. That's why all AI models today have context limits or context windows. They literally run out of compute power to remember the beginning of a long conversation or a large document. It becomes exponentially expensive to be smart over a long period.
And the Engram references in the DeepSeek code suggest they believe they have solved this fundamental problem.
They are moving to what is called an O1 lookup, and that's computer science speak for instant. The cost of recall is constant, whether the document is 1 page or 1,000,000 pages.
Give us an analogy for that. What does that feel like?
Okay, so imagine moving from reading that scroll, where you have to unroll the whole thing every time to find a specific sentence, to having a perfect photographic memory with a flawless index system built into your brain. You don't need to reread the scroll. You just know it. You can instantly recall any detail from 1,000,000 pages of text without any extra effort. It's like having a perfect Dewey Decimal System for every single neuron in the model's brain.
That changes absolutely everything. If you can feed an AI the entire U.S. tax code or every medical paper ever written, and it costs 0 extra energy for it to recall any part of it instantly, the possibilities are staggering.
It allows for massive scale context processing that Western models currently can't do efficiently or cheaply. And here is the critical geopolitical angle. The code explicitly shows they are optimizing this new architecture for the hardware they do have access to. They know they can't get enough of the top-tier NVIDIA chips, so they are inventing new software that is so hyper-efficient that they don't need as many chips to achieve the same or even better performance.
It's a classic case of asymmetric warfare. We're focused on building bigger and bigger tanks. They're inventing completely new tactics that make the tanks less relevant.
Precisely. And speaking of tanks, or chips, there's a major hardware reality check in the stack this week, too. Despite all the bans and export controls, reports surfaced that Beijing has conditionally approved the purchase of 400,000 NVIDIA H200 chips.
400,000? How do you even hide 400,000 chips? That's not a small shipment. That's a mountain of silicon.
You don't hide it. It's a loophole. It's a backroom deal. It's a gray market through a third country. We don't have the full details, but the point is the blockade is porous. They are still getting the hardware. But even more importantly, they are optimizing their software, like this new Engram system, to squeeze every last drop of performance out of the chips they do have.
And the U.S. government is clearly noticing this shift.
They are panicking. NASA issued a memo this week banning all DeepSeek products from their networks. They are terrified of data exfiltration and intellectual property theft. They are realizing that this software decoupling is real and it's happening fast. We are looking at a fundamental bifurcation of the internet, a Western AI ecosystem that is largely closed, proprietary, and expensive, and an Eastern ecosystem that is increasingly open, hyper-efficient, and spreading everywhere.
Before we move on from AI, I just want to touch on one more thing from the reports, DeepSeek OCR2, because this connects to how AI literally sees the world.
This is the vision shift. Traditional OCR, that's optical character recognition, it scans a page like a dumb machine from top to bottom, line by line. But that's not how humans read, is it? If I show you a complex table or a difficult math equation, you don't scan it linearly. You focus. Your eyes dart to the headers, then to the data, then to the footnotes.
Right, your eyes dart around to make sense of the structure first.
DeepSeek OCR2 uses a new method called visual tokens. It mimics that human attention. It focuses its resolution and processing power on the most complex parts of a document. This implies a massive leap in the ability to digitize the world's unstructured data, financial records, scientific manuscripts, historical documents. It's the ability to ingest the world's analog knowledge much, much faster.
Okay, so let's just recap the board so far. The U.S. is reasserting physical control in Venezuela, using a kind of economic strangulation. China is asserting architectural control in the digital realm by fundamentally rewriting the rules of AI memory and vision. But there is a third domain, a third theater, where control seems to be breaking down completely for everyone.
The crisis in the commons, orbital fragility.
This is the part of the story that honestly feels like the opening scene of a disaster movie. We rely on space for everything, GPS, communications, surveillance, science. But this week, the machinery we have up there just started to break.
It was a real convergence of failures. Let's start with the International Space Station. On January 15th, we had a historic and very sudden medical evacuation.
All right, this is Crew 11. They came home months ahead of schedule.
They splashed down just 10.5 hours after undocking. For a space mission, that is a flat-out rush job. NASA cited a serious medical condition, but has kept the details strictly private, citing astronaut privacy. But the immediate impact is that the ISS is now running on a skeleton crew.
How many people are left up there right now?
Just 3. Astronaut Jeff Williams and cosmonauts Kudzverchkov and Mikhaev. That is barely enough to keep the lights on and the station pointed in the right direction. They are in what's being called survival mode.
What does that mean, survival mode?
It means no spacewalks. All major science experiments are halted. They are just trying to keep the station flying and maintain. It's a huge blow to the research program.
And looking at this, I can't help but think about the future. We frame this as an ISS problem, but isn't this really an Artemis warning? A warning for our plans to go back to the moon and onto Mars?
It's a massive red flag for the entire Mars program. Look, Williams and the rest of Crew 11 made it down safely in 10.5 hours because they were in low Earth orbit. They're only 250 miles up. If you are halfway to Mars, your return time isn't measured in hours, it's measured in months.
You can't just turn the car around and come home.
You can't. If that same medical emergency, whatever it was, happened on the way to Mars, that astronaut dies. Period. It highlights just how fragile our biology is in that environment. We are seriously planning to send humans into a radiation bath for 2 years, and we just saw that we can barely handle a medical crisis when they are right above our heads.
And speaking of Mars, the silence from out there is getting louder this week.
The loss of the orbiter. This is a huge blow that got buried in the other news cycles. is, or I should say was, a critical Mars orbiter. It lost contact back in December, and everyone hoped that after the solar conjunction in January, when Mars came out from behind the sun, it would phone home. It didn't.
So it's just gone. We don't know what happened.
The telemetry suggests it's tumbling. It's lost attitude control. So it's likely a thruster failure or a major GNC guidance, navigation, and control computer error. And why does this matter so much? MAVEN wasn't just another satellite studying the atmosphere. It was the primary data relay bridge for the entire planet. It was the Wi-Fi router for Mars.
For the rovers on the ground.
Yes, for Perseverance and Curiosity. They do their science, then they send their data up to MAVEN, and MAVEN, with its big antenna, blasts it back to Earth. Without MAVEN, we are severely throttling the amount of data we can get back. We are effectively blinding ourselves to the Martian surface at the exact moment we are talking about sending humans there.
And as if that wasn't enough bad news from space, the sun decided to wake up and remind everyone who is really in charge of the solar system.
The S4 solar radiation storm, this happened on January 19th. A massive X-class flare erupted from the sun, the strongest one we've seen since the famous Halloween storms of 2003.
And we saw the pictures of the red aurora over India, which is just bizarre.
Blood red sky in Hanal, India. That's an extremely low latitude for an aurora that just shouldn't happen. What it means is that a huge number of very high-energy particles were smashing into oxygen atoms at an altitude of 300 kilometers.
And what does an event like that do to our technology in orbit?
It causes data gaps. It can flip bits in a satellite's memory. Satellites can lose their orientation. And for that poor skeleton crew on the ISS, they had to retreat into the station's radiation shelter protocols for their own safety.
So just picture this scene. You have 3 people completely alone in a giant tin can, unable to do their science jobs, hiding from a solar storm, all while the primary communication link to Mars goes dead.
It's a very stark reminder. We talk a big game about controlling space, but we are really just guests there, and our critical infrastructure is aging and it is fragile. We are busy building these digital gods on Earth with AI, but our physical foothold in the heavens is actively slipping.
It's a heavy week, there's no doubt about it. But we always try to find the light at the end of the deep dive. Section 5. Scientific and Economic Horizons. Because despite all the chaos, the world does keep turning and people keep inventing amazing things.
And there is some good news. The new IMF report is out. They're projecting global growth at 3.3%.
That seems pretty strong despite the wars, despite the situation in Venezuela and the standoff in Ukraine.
Despite the wars, and they attribute it directly to what they're calling the AI dividend. All this massive investment pouring into the tech sector, into buying those ships, into building those models. It's actually offsetting the economic drag from the trade wars and the geopolitical instability. Although they do include a pretty strong warning about a potential AI valuation bubble.
Of course, if these models don't start making real money soon, that 3.3% growth could evaporate pretty quickly.
It could. But for now, it's a bright spot.
Well, let's look at the pure science. I love this one. Unsinkable metal.
This is just so cool. It's from the University of Rochester. They used femtosecond lasers. These are lasers that fire extremely fast pulses of light to etch the surface of aluminum. And they were inspired by diving bell spiders and fire ants.
Fire ants. How do fire ants inspire unsinkable metal?
You know how when there's a flood, fire ants clump together into a raft and float? They trap tiny air bubbles between their bodies. This etched metal does the same thing on a microscopic level. The surface structure traps a layer of air so effectively that even if you puncture the metal, it still floats. The air bubble literally pushes the water away.
That could change ship design forever. That changes offshore platforms, anything that needs to be buoyant.
It creates structures that, in theory, literally cannot sink. It's a beautiful piece of biomimicry, just brilliant.
And then looking way, way up, the LMA telescope array mapped what they're calling magnetic superhighways in a distant galaxy, ARP 220.
This really changes our fundamental understanding of how galaxies evolve. We used to think it was just gravity pulling gas and dust together to form stars. Now we can see these incredibly powerful magnetic fields that act like channels, guiding the gas, shaping the star-forming regions. It's like finding out there's a hidden nervous system running through the universe.
And then back down in the dirt, a breakthrough with nitrogen-fixing wheat.
This could be huge for global agriculture. Scientists have engineered a strain of wheat that can pull nitrogen directly from the air, just like a legume, like a soybean can. This massively reduces the reliance on synthetic fertilizers, which is a huge win for the climate and a huge cost saving for farmers around the world.
So we are inventing unsinkable metals and super wheat, even while we argue over borders and struggle to keep our satellites talking. It's a strange time.
That's the central paradox of our time, isn't it? We are absolutely brilliant at the micro level, the gene, the atom, the laser pulse, but we are really struggling with the macro, the nation, the orbit, the piece.
So let's try to wrap this all up. Let's synthesize. What does this wild week actually mean?
I think if you synthesize this week, what you see is the birth of a fragile new order. We are aggressively and successfully expanding our physical control on Earth. Just look at the Rubio Doctrine in Venezuela. We are simultaneously and aggressively bifurcating the digital world look at the AI architectural war between the US and China. But our physical tether to the cosmos, to the future, is visibly fraying.
It's a powerful juxtaposition of immense power and shocking fragility.
Precisely. We are building thinking AI system 2 reasoning, infinite memory systems. We are literally creating digital entities that will soon be able to outthink us in every domain. But we can't keep a simple Mars orbiter from tumbling out of control. We can't keep the International Space Station fully staffed and operational.
It raises a final, provocative question for everyone listening to mull over.
It does. As we head into February of 2026, you should ask yourself this. Are we expanding our digital appetites faster than our physical reality can actually support? We are building artificial minds that can read 1,000,000 pages in an instant, but our human astronauts are hiding from solar flares in a space station that's just limping along.
The software is decoupling from the hardware, not just in AI, but for civilization itself. The digital world is accelerating away, but the physical world, with its physics and its politics and its solar flares, is pushing back. Hard.
And that is the central tension that is going to define the rest of this year and probably the rest of this decade. Can we keep our feet on the ground and in orbit while our collective heads are disappearing into the cloud?
Something to mull over this weekend. Thanks for taking the deep dive with us. We'll see you next time.
Stay curious.